Hi everyone, we're live again, and today I have an amazing guest, Markus Förderer ASC BVK, who is known for such films as Origins, Independence Day, Resurgence, Red Notice, and quite a few more. But let's get Markus in and let's get him to talk about it. So, Markus, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me.
So, for those who are not familiar with your brilliant career so far, could you talk a little bit about your journey as a cinematographer?
Yeah, so basically, I grew up in the southern part of Germany in a small town, village. Didn't know anybody in the film business. And I think I started doing internships on smaller film productions. And at some point, somebody told me, you should check out this company, Airy. They're so big in the film business. So I actually moved to Munich to start an internship at Airy Rental and learned everything about cameras, cables, every piece of equipment. It was a great time, and also I got to meet a lot of cinematographers who came in and out and test new equipment. That was like the age where film transitioned to digital slowly. So it was a very exciting time. And then I went to film school in Munich. That was a great experience. And I was fortunate during my time in film school, I got to shoot my first feature film. It's a post-apocalyptic film called Hell. And that got me a couple of awards. It was quite extreme. We really overexposed the film, 4 to 5 stops. It's like a post-apocalyptic film. The sun is so bright, you can't go outside without protecting your skin from the sun. So we made it really bright. So that helped to stand out. It was selected at Camera Marche for a cinematography debut competition. And eventually I ended up in the US. I worked with Roland Emmerich on a couple projects, like Independence Day. Resurgence was one of the biggest ones. And then I moved to LA, and ever since I'm traveling around wherever the projects take me.
Brilliant. So we met when you invited me to check out your passion project. That's how I call it, because I don't think you would be able to do it without passion. The passion project is Cine Flares. Could you talk about what Cine Flares is and how that came about?
Yeah, it actually started with my first feature, Hell, which it was, like I mentioned, post-apocalyptic. The sun played an integral role, almost like a character in the story. It was, and we decided to shoot in the winter time in Germany when the trees are still have no leaves, like look dead, so to say. So they look like they're burned by the sun. So I knew the weather, it would be like a fly, would be overcast and gray most of the time. So early on in testing, I tried to find techniques to make this overcast sky appear sunny. So I experimented a lot with lenses, different vintage lenses, modern lenses, different coatings, and lighting techniques, how to get those lenses to flare and maybe cover some of the overcast sky basically with lens flares and create a sense for sunlight. And that's when that whole obsession with lens flares started. And over the years, I kept testing more and more, and I built an archive of lens flare shots basically. And at some point, that also started at the end of film school. I put a little project together with a couple of friends that you can compare lens flares side by side. And over the years, I have to say, thanks to COVID and recently the writer's strike, I had a lot of time on my hands to rethink the whole project, and we reshot everything. It's basically all the tests are shot with a motion control system. It's always the same lighting source, the same camera body, the same photometrics, so to say. And we built this portal. It's like a side-by-side player where you can select your favorite vintage lenses, modern lenses, anamorphic lenses, everything, and compare them side by side and just look and analyze the lens flare. And for me, it is not just, it's called Cine Flares, but it's not just about flares. I think the lens flare is really like a fingerprint or like the DNA of a lens. Like by shining purely light into a lens, a lens will reveal its character. Does it have character? Is it very fairly clean, neutral, or sterile, right? Or what kind of is it able to hold contrast, or it creates a lot of V-link glare or rainbow flare or colorful like prismatic effects. Like there's so much you can see. So for me to look at a lens flare in front of a black background like gives me a lot of information already. And then in my preparation for films, that's how I start, and then I pre-select a couple of my favorites, and then I test those specifically to the conditions of that film, be it maybe a night exterior or fire or whatever the project requires.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting project, honestly, and I thoroughly enjoyed checking this out with you. And I've been messing around with the website a little bit myself afterwards, and it's really cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for your feedback. I knew like it is such a small community, right? And when we started working on it, I'm not a programmer, so I had to find a team of programmers to help me build it. I designed it, and we shot all the tests. And I thought, like, will there be more than 5 people out there who are really interested to like play and geek out about flares and lenses? And last week at Camera Marsh in Poland, we showed it for the first time, and the response was quite overwhelming. So I'm glad to see there's more than 5 of us out there. That's nice to see.
There are certainly more than 5, and I encourage everyone to check it out yourself. It's cineflares.com, correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, go check that out. It's
and maybe I have to add,
open.
We're still working on more features. It's like a beta right now, so you can just play with it. It was meant to collect some feedback and get some ideas what else to add while we're building more features. And there's going to be a bigger archive. The idea is you can select your focal length right now. You select 35, whatever. You can select your T-stop, because everybody knows, right? The wide open, the lens will flare drastically different than if you stop it down, for example. And then you can compare it. But we're working on more features that you can save, like an auto-generated PDF file, which has the information and more information. And a lot of visual effects people are asking, can we somehow also download certain plates? So that's stuff we're looking into as well.
So I'm obviously a massive vintage lens nerd, or lens nerd in general. So I know this is for me, but who is this intended for? What's your goal with the platform?
Yeah. I build it in a way, the way I would use it, like to assist in prep, because there's so many lenses out there, like vintage lenses, new lenses, rehoused lenses, like vintage lenses people might have forgotten about. They're coming back into the world of filmmaking. And so for me, it's I thought it's a good way for filmmakers to discover what's out there and compare them in like a lab scenario. So it's just the flare in front of black. It's shot with motion control, so you can really compare it. And just pick your lens if you want to rent something for your next project, or you want to buy a lens or rehouse a lens, or just be inspired. Or you have a certain set of lenses which you used many times, but you want to learn more about them. How do they react under light in different circumstances? Under which T-stop do you like the flare? That's the way we put it out now, basically as a tool to discover and explore and learn about these lenses. But we're very, very curious to hear feedback from users. And like I mentioned, people obviously want to take something from it. So there's going to be a feature coming soon that you can share these with your collaborators. Maybe you want to send a link to your director or visual effects supervisor or rental house and say, hey, this is interesting. I want to find something like this. So that's what's coming next.
So let's get people to actually check it out and maybe even give us some feedback or some questions, some suggestions of the things they would like to see on it. And if you have any questions regarding Cine Flares or just general advice from Markus, get your questions in and we'll try to answer them at the end. But what I would love to do now is actually have a look at the platform if we can. Let's get the screen share on and maybe you can talk us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the basic interface. You have on the left side and the right side the same amount of lenses to choose from. There's different categories like spherical large format, anamorphic large format, Super 35, and you can pick and choose a lens. For example, Bausch & Lomb Super Baltar on the left side, and on the right side you see the same selection. You can compare it, for example, to Kawa Cine Prominar. That's a very interesting lens, right? It has a gold coating, creates very warm flares. On the top, you can select your t-stop, your focal length, for example, 32. Select your t-stop. Maybe you want to see it wide open, or I'm gonna look at this now at the T4. Maybe that's the stop I want to shoot on to have some depth of field. And for the Bausch & Lomb, I'm gonna select the 35, which is the closest equivalent, and also a T4 to be fair. And when you hit play, there's always the same motion happening. The light source is moving from left to right in a 180-degree arc. And you basically see this is exactly the same. I can pause it, and you can go with your arrow keys. You can go back and forward and look at it. This is exactly the same light source. It's daylight balance, 5,600 Kelvin. But as you see on the Kawa Cine Promenade, with it creates these golden flares. What's interesting for people, right? Like it's not necessarily a yellow image, but the flares become very golden, versus the Bausch & Lomb creates a cooler image and a very unique phenomenon which is called like narcissism. I learned it from Jay Holban in his amazing book. It's basically the iris blades are reflected back off either the sensor glass or some internal element of the lens. And this, for example, goes away when you open the iris. That's also another interesting option on that tool. You can compare the lens to itself. So if you keep the Bausch & Lomb Super Baltar on the left side, and I also select the Super Baltar on the right side, 35, and on the left side I'll open the iris all the way to T2.3. On the right side I stop down to T4, and then you can see how that reacts, and the exposure is compensated accordingly with shutter, so there's no filters or anything added. And now you see on the right side that narcissism, so that the lens, the iris is reflected back into the image, and on the left side the iris is basically retracted in the housing, so you don't see this effect. That's basically it. And you can, of course, you can compare anamorphics to spherical. That's always a discussion. And also, maybe you're right, like there's sometimes discussions with which affects people, and why do you want to shoot on an old lens? What is it like a clean lens? Like there's a Kawa anamorphic, right? A fairly old anamorphic lens. You can compare it to more modern, whatever, Zelmus anamorphic. Compare 40 to 40, maybe T2.8 to T2.8. Oops, and then you'll see the difference. Like the Kawa has way more Wheeling glare, right, which softens the contrast, can be very nice. The Zelmus has those more purple flares.
Yeah, love it. Love it. I really enjoy this tool. And what I enjoy about this tool is that it's so precisely repeated. So there is none of that variation of lighting source, or where the flare is coming from, because that can, or brightness of the lighting source, like all these things, or change of camera, change of white balance, which is what usually happens, with these things.
That's actually, it's a good point. That's actually a fun thing.
You wanna show
There's
something else?
super speed and a super speed uncoated, for example. It's the same glass, but the coating has been polished off on the uncoated version.
Okay, yeah, let's have a look.
And yeah, it's a good point what you brought out, the repeatability. Like so many times when I see people testing in a test room, you see somebody with a flashlight in their hand in front of a test chart, right? And they're waving the flashlight, but every degree angle makes a huge difference of how the flare reacts. Like you can do full screen, obviously. Oops. And like right every degree angle, it's so hard to compare something. And I think for flares or lenses in general, some artifacts or characteristics are so subtle that it's best to judge by comparing something side by side. So that's how that whole project came about.
Great. So yeah, guys just check it out yourself. It's free for everyone to try. I think Markus is looking for feedback, feature stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it's very welcome at this point.
Yeah, the
And
idea is we're working on a bigger library with frequent app updates, and that's what we're also very curious to collect feedback. Are people willing to pay a little something to allow us to constantly update it? Because like, right, every other week there's a new lens coming, being either something newly rehoused or a brand new lens, or a new lens that's supposed to look like a vintage lens. And because it's motion controlled and in this controlled setup, we can keep adding on to that library. That's what we did the last couple of years. It's impossible to shoot, like we have almost 100 lens sets captured yet. They're not all in that library yet. It takes some time to integrate them and organize everything. But so it's that's the idea, to keep growing and try to stay up to date with new lenses. And are people willing like to pay something for it, or should it be sponsor based? But of course, then you run into maybe the issue of people might think it's biased, or so that's what we're trying to figure out. So very curious to hear people's opinion.
Yeah, for sure. This is done for the community, so very much for the cinematographers and alike. So yeah, it's the best feedback is from them, right? And it was going to be my next question. What it is a great, very cool platform already, but what are your future plans with Cine Flares? Where do you want to take it?
Yeah, basically, like I mentioned, to keep growing the library, staying up to date. So far, we captured most vintage lenses, like all the common vintage lenses for sure we have, and the latest rehousing projects. And there's a couple of some more lenses which don't have too much character. We didn't capture those yet. We're trying to update that. So the idea is to grow the library and adding more features so people can share those flares. Like there's going to be a document which has specific technical information too, so people have a quick overview what other lenses are in that set, what's their close focus and all that basic stuff. And then a feature to be able to download plates, at first probably just still plates, which you can overlay over your footage. I do this many times, like doing color timing. For example, like in VisualFX stage, I share some of those plates with the VisualFX department. But even doing color timing, sometimes you notice like, oh, we had to shoot a certain shot with a crash cam, right, rigged to a car, and we chose to use a more basic lens, like a modern photography lens, and it's just a high contrast. And sure, you can like flare the blacks with timing tools, but by overlaying a flare, which has like a flare plate, which has a certain V-link layer, very subtle overlay, helps you to get a bit more of an organic feel, so to say. So that's something I personally use a lot, and maybe that's something hopefully people would be interested in.
Well, some good feedback here already, but a very relevant question from Liang here. Can we download the lens flares and use them for visual effects work?
So currently not, but we're working on that feature. So hopefully early next year, there's going to be a feature that you can select some lenses and download a plate. And that's also what we're super curious to get feedback. What's the right file format? Like, do people really want the EXRs, or they want the raw files, or just to make it easy to use and not overloading people's systems? Like I myself experimented years ago with like all these platforms who sell like film grain overlays and all that stuff, or what's called like light leaks, which is some random flares basically. But here we have this controlled flare moving. So I think the stills is a good option, and then another option is the video plate. that people can track in the right position where they need it in their video. So definitely coming.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So would it be safe? Okay, let's not assume anything. But what's your favorite lens characteristic?
That's the thing. Like flares is so obvious. Like people are surprised. I'm not such a big fan of the flare, using a flare creatively in a shot myself. Right? It's so often overused. For me, like in that test environment, the flare is literally just showing the fingerprint. Like, hey, what is this lens doing when you really hit it with light? So for me, I am a big bokeh person, right? Like to me, the right kind of bokeh, which can be very different from story to story or for shot to shot, what you want to use, like being it some anamorphic bokeh or some interesting spherical aberration you see in the out of focus or that soap bubble. It's hard to say what, like, I think bokeh is one of the most important things because people keep forgetting, like we always focus on what's in focus, but on a big cinema screen, in most shots, like 80% of the screen is out of focus. You focus on the actor's eyes and most of the shot is out of focus. So it has quite an impact subconsciously on how you perceive the image, how that bokeh looks like. So I hope that answers the question.
So since you are still quite obsessed with lens flares, I think it's fair to say you put in so much time into. What's the favorite one? What's the favorite lens flare?
Favorite. What I showed earlier, I love the Kawa Cine Prominars, and I use them many times myself because of those golden flares. Because it's quite unique that you see very warm flares, but the lens itself is not tinted yellow, right? Like you photograph a face, it's not getting yellow. But it's quite a statement to use that. So this is one I really like. Hard to say. It really changes. I look at so many flares, and also interesting. Some lenses I used so many times, and I tested so many times myself. And you think like, oh, I know this lens in and out. But by spending some time on a Cine Flares platform and seeing it without any distraction, right? There's no landscape, no face. It's just a flare in front of black. You really discover some unique flare pattern. And then also learning when it happens. Like some lenses do something really interesting when you shine light straight down the barrel, right? And at a certain T-stop, you see, oh, wow, at T4, this lens light straight into down the barrel creates some magic. So next time you shoot, let's say, whatever, a car commercial, and you have a car headlights approaching you dead on, you know what lens to use, what T-stop to create that certain magic, happy accident moment, so to say. That's what I find quite fascinating.
Well, some more feedback here. Already shaved off hours of prep with this tool. That's what you want to hear, I guess. That's pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah. That's the thing. I'm personally, when I do my testing for feature films or projects, I'm not very technical. So I usually don't do charts. I have a face, like a person being an actress or a stand-in in the right costume. We go to whatever, I don't like test rooms too much in camera rental houses, so I usually go outside and try to find something that feels organic and shoot in the style we want to shoot the film. But through that Cine Flares project, I had to learn to become very precise. You can't do any mistake, otherwise it will not line up anymore, or you can't do any mistake. You want to be truthful to those lenses. And so that became a whole different skill set to be so accurate, and have a big support from many people. Like Julie, my wife, is a big help, and protocoling everything, making sure it tracks right. So that's hopefully help. That's the whole idea. It saves everyone, myself included. I quickly might look at something. Oh yeah, cool. These 2-3 lenses look interesting. I will discuss those with the director and shoot a test. Instead of you go to a new rental house and you ask them to put out 20 cases and then you test for 1 or 2 days. So hopefully this will save people time. It's happy to hear about that.
So let's dive deeper into lenses then. How vital are lenses in your toolkit as a cinematographer?
I think it's one of the most integral part of like our toolkit, right? If not the most important. Like the cameras come and go, right? Like this new generation of cameras, sensors, film stocks. But the lens, it's really like, right, how do we see the world, or how do we want our audience to see the world? And I feel like especially with digital color timing, the image itself becomes so fluid. Like you can create virtually your own film stock, your own sensor. So if you know how to expose and you choose the right camera that gives you enough information, right? Like for me, the most important part is the lens. And that's actually how I always choose in a project. I first try to narrow down which lens to use, and then I find the right sensor to pair it with. You might find a certain lens that's what happened like when we prepped Red Notice. We found this ultra Panatars at Panavision and old APO Panatars, beautiful glass, and they were like 1.25x squeeze, so very subtle anamorphic squeeze. So after testing, we figured the red with the vision sensor was the perfect match to maximize that image circle. So that's how I go about.
So a next relevant question is, how do you actually test lenses, and what are you looking for when picking the lens for the next project?
Yeah. Like I said, I try to shoot real scenarios, like people, no test charts. Don't like test charts. No Christmas lights. So yeah, whatever is important for if I know it's a project that takes place at night, I try to go somewhere outside or in a car, have some real background so you can judge some real natural bokeh, and I compare it. That's so important. Like if you see, there's so many great lenses out there you could shoot a whole movie with, right? But if you compare it to some other lens in the exact same scenario, you will discover the nuances, and suddenly it feels more right for this kind of project. So I'm looking mainly for, does the lens have anything to offer to add? Does it have any sort of character, right? Like, or is it is it neutral? Which could be interesting too for a certain kind of project. But usually I'm looking for something that creates a happy accident on set. I'm really like, I get bored shooting on a long project. You shoot sometimes for a month, every day. You choose your lenses, right? Your weapon, so to say, of choice. And then you see it every day in every scenario, in close-ups, wide shots, exterior, interior. You see everything. And in a way, I get like creatively bored of seeing the same lens all the time. So I'm looking for lenses that have certain surprises. And by doing your prep and homework, you test for it. You're not going to be completely surprised, like, oh my god, if I would have known this crazy rainbow flare would happen, I would have never chosen this lens, right? You don't want this to happen. You have to do your homework. But by knowing that certain kind of image characteristics can appear under certain lighting conditions, then it's really inspiring for me to embrace it.
So based on your experience then, do you lean more towards modern or vintage lenses?
I mean, I'm here in vintage lenses for video. It is obviously vintage lenses, but there's also interesting modern lenses who are inspired by vintage lenses, like the character of vintage lenses. So to get, I think mechanics are so important. So if it's vintage lenses, you need a good rehousing for certain projects, right? Like if you shoot yourself and you have time, maybe you can, that's not so important. But if you work with a big crew and sometimes several units, and you have to share equipment and send something off to the splinter unit, you want to make sure the mechanics are good. So it has to be either a well rehoused vintage lens or a modern lens that has some kind of vintage character.
Mm-hmm. So, sort of continue with your preferences. What's your favorite focal length to use and why?
Good question. It's also that shifts from project to project, and also maybe there's some preference over time. I mean, if I would have to say now, I would say 30, 35, 32 to 40 millimeter kind of is a good ballpark. It's interesting. I listened to when you had Oren Software on, and they talked about the creator that they shot pretty much everything with a 75, which is amazing. I love the choice of not constantly, you know, this has to be 25 and this has to be 21 and this now is a 29. Like to make a statement, right, in the focal lengths you choose. But so 75 would be a bit long for my taste. I like to be close to what my eyes can see, maybe slightly tighter.
Well, one of my favorites is the next one. What about a whole lens set then? It can be cinema, it can be photo-based optic. What's your favorite lens set to use?
Like, I never use twice the same lenses in a row. I think this never happened. Like I mentioned earlier, in a way I get bored by, like, I don't want to say bored, but maybe not inspired by using the same lens again. So might happen again after a couple of years or for a smaller project, like I find this. So I don't really have a favorite lens set. I've always a lens set I'm fascinated by, that I just maybe discovered, and there's something that got me excited about, and I feel like I'm just dying. I'm waiting for the right project to come up where this makes sense, right? You don't just want to say, this is cool lens, I'm going to use it on my next project no matter what. I'm waiting for the right thing to come up. But what recently got me really excited is the Olympus OM, I think rehoused version by, I think, Zero Optic did something. That really surprised me how interesting the flares look, especially. Like, yeah, so that's the recent lens that got me quite excited.
Well, that's good enough for me, but let's keep pushing you a little bit further with the most underrated lens or lens set out there right now. Do you have an opinion on such thing?
Good question. They're all underrated.
It's not just me who wants to know. David here wants to know the same thing. So you've got to give us something.
And I think, right, like people say, there's no such thing as a bad lens. Like, what's a bad lens in one person's eye is a great lens. And the same happened to me over time. Like certain types of lens flares I never liked. I found them distracting, and now certainly I can appreciate them more. So lenses I ruled out before because they created a certain type of flare that I found distracting, I now slowly find. I think still to this day, the Helios, like the 44, there's something magical about it. That, yeah, I mean, so many people know about it, experiment with it, and but there's something really interesting about that lens, if I can say that. Might be not a surprising answer, but
I'll take the answer. Perfect answer for me. Thank you.
Okay, give me another one. I have another one. Actually, I'm looking at it right now, so it's so obvious I keep forgetting it. There's this Japanese amazing wizard who makes MS Optical. He makes pancake lenses for the Leica M mount. These are amazing. Like, if you like small lenses, very simple optical designs, like the more optical elements you use, the more aberrations you try to correct, the more you create a beast, I think. So this I feel like it's very similar to how my eye looks like. So I'm looking at the 28 millimeter MS Optics f2.
Yes,
lens.
MS Optics. It's if we still have Peter Cooper here, who commented earlier. He's a massive fan of MS Optics. So yeah, that's how I learned about them, and they're pretty cool. And so you currently have that on your face, right? That's
yeah.
But do you have some sort of you don't have an autofocus adapter of any sort on it, or a LiDAR, because you always stay in focus even though you move back and forth.
I
I
know,
thought
I
you
can
have an
feel it moving.
autofocus lens.
I feel like I just feel it. How much? No,
Yeah,
there's
you
no.
have an. I thought you have an autofocus lens. I could swear that you move in and out and it stays in
Yeah.
focus.
I
But then
just feel it between my nose and between my eyebrows.
that's it. That's my trick. I'm on a vintage lens myself here, and I've got a 28 2 that is slightly stopped down. I'm not gonna say which lens unless someone asks, but let's keep it for a mystery for now. But yeah, very similar setup to you, and yeah, fully manual, and I'm sort of I'm sort of guessing where I am here. Oh, that's really cool. It's
Also
nice to hear
something I
about something
learned from
unusual.
really great focus pullers. Like if you constantly try to chase focus, you create a lot of
That's right.
distraction. But by being comfortable letting the talent ride the sweet spot, you don't have to constantly jiggle around. Of course, you have to know when to.
Yeah.
Pull
Me
it
and you are like the best actors in the industry at the moment. We work with the lens. We try to work with the lens right now. So apart from the MS Optic 28, what was the most recent vintage lens you've used?
I think the Voigtlander Zoomar, which there's a rehoused version. I think Ancient Optics brought that back to life. That's a lens I got really excited about because it's the first zoom, like full frame, 35mm full frame zoom lens ever, and it's such an amazing history. So I have one of those, and I used it on my recent feature film. It's full frame, and it's amazing how much they got right in that first design. Like you would think there's trial and error going on, especially in a day and age where they didn't have computer-assisted optical designs. But I think still today, this looks better than most zoom lenses I've ever seen.
True. Shout out to Clint. I don't know if he's watching or not, but yeah, we massive fans of what Asian Optics do. Just pick out the most interesting lenses to your house. It's always it's nice that people actually sort of are on the same page, because Zoom R, some people might think, oh, now the range it's a mid-range, sort of not that usable. Why would I use that? But then everyone loves that lens.
Yeah. Just move the camera into the range, and you can zoom.
Right. So let's roll back a little bit and talk about how did you, apart from the feature film, obviously, that you've mentioned, when you started, was that when you got into vintage lenses, picking out for the film, or was there another backstory in your childhood or something like that?
I think when I started, digital photography, I started with some more modern lenses, Sigma lenses and Nikon lenses, and I think that was when I bought my first cheap lens vintage lens of eBay, which was a Nikon, I think 50mm f1.8, and it's such a small piece of glass, and I realized, wait a second, this thing, which was maybe $30, and it's so small and light, I personally respond so much better than most modern, more expensive lenses. Like, what's going on there? So this maybe was early on triggered something, and still to this day, this is a fascinating process when you see modern lens designs that become quite a beast, right? With so many lens elements trying to correct for every aberration and not having any focus breathing and all that stuff. And that I feel personally way more at home, or I feel like it's a way more human way of perceiving the world with some more basic vintage lenses.
So, do you own any vintage lenses right now? And if so, which ones?
I bought that Zoomar, the original one, and I kept using it quite a bit. So this is an interesting. It's not that big for a full frame zoom lens. So I have this one, couple Helioses, a couple of lenses. I would
The best ones. I say the best ones. Well, those are the ones that you sort of want to have, right? Just to mess around with, sort of take with you, because you might not always be able to get at a rental house. So yeah, that's why I asked, because
I think
I'm
there's
sure
more
you
and
rely
more
on
rental
rental.
houses now, right? Boutique rental houses specializing in vintage lenses, or also the big ones. Since there's more and more high quality rehousings appearing now, right? A couple of years ago, it was more like a passion thing. People would do some cinemodding, but still, if a first AC in the US comes with his Preston and puts on a torque, the lens might fall apart. So this problem has been solved, and they're becoming more and more rental friendly, right? So that's a great trend to see, that no matter where you work, like sometimes I work, like I'm based in LA, but I work all over the world and rarely in two places back to back. So sometimes it was tough to, like, sometimes I shot in Asia and all they have is the latest, greatest Arri Zeiss gear. And if you want something more vintage, it's difficult. So it's good maybe that you have one or two lenses in your pocket. That's what I also have, like for emergency, so to say. Like I know I can rely on this. I have to.
Well, I might need to try and convince you to own a rehoused Helios. I have special connections. I'll sort you out. So we have Clint is actually here. Great, Clean Formation Optics. Loving the conversation. Brilliant. Thank you, Clint, for joining. Always nice to see you here. Question here from David about the use of Zoomar. Was it the September 5th? I don't know if you can share this information or not.
It was used for some scenes on that film, yes. But it's not, it's still in post-production. Will come out next year, so I can't talk too much about that yet.
Yes.
But it's a visually amazing film. I see it every day. We're doing actually color timing right now, so.
Brilliant. How involved are you in grading? Because that is important, right? Because you choose a lens because that lens is slightly colder on the skin or warmer, and then grading can just change all of it. So
yeah, it's so important.
How involved are you?
So important to, in a way, also I feel like the director and producers, they hire you to safeguard the project, because nobody can really tell, right? You spend so much time on set, or like you mentioned, even in pre-production, you choose certain lenses, cameras, lighting, production spending so much money on lighting and the time it takes to get it right on set. But in post-production, with a couple of clicks, you can undo a lot. People always think color grading that's where we're going to make the film shine. But in my experience, it's a very fragile process. You can quickly lose a lot of very interesting things that emotionally created a certain mood in the scene. And in post-production, there's amazing colorists and amazing people working, but of course they come sometimes at a point in a project they don't have all the knowledge, right, what went into that scene. So it's very important to have the cinematographer involved and of course the director involved. And this happened to me maybe once in my career, that I was not able to join a DI, and I cannot watch that film at all. Like I have to be there. Luckily these days it's getting a bit quicker, and with all the remote tools, maybe you can set a look together with the director and a colorist in a suite and then move on. If you have to shoot somewhere else, you can still jump in from your iPad and remotely watch the grade and give some notes.
Brilliant. So let's cover a few questions or comments here from YouTube and Facebook. There's an interesting one here from Corvega. Funny coincidence, just watched Independence Day Resurgence on local TV. The movie ended literally half an hour ago. How cool is that? Awesome. A good one here from Mark. What about diffusion filters with flares?
That's a good point. Can make a play a big impact. And that's also something we're going to add at some point. We can't combine every lens with every filter, but I did this years ago as an example, just using a ultra prime as a clean neutral lens and showing even a clear filter already, an optical flat, how much more reflections happen between that filter and the front element. And then you can go on to write like subtle diffusion filters, mist filters, promise filters. And suddenly, like I saw this in our motion control setup, you see certain lens elements appearing suddenly, which are invisible usually, just because there's more reflections happening internally. So it's a super interesting field, but very specific, hard to test. You have to test to your specific project. If you know these are the lenses you want to use, what's going on with the fly? These are lenses you want to use, what kind of filtration, and maybe just test if there's any funky effects happening. But I highly encourage people to test. I'm personally not a big fan of like fake anamorphic streak flares, filters and stuff like that. I think just go pick the right glass and try to create a look with your glass as much as possible. But sometimes you might not be able to get a vintage lens for certain reasons, and you might use filtration to add to the character.
Brilliant. So quite an involved one here from Joshua. Great project, Markus. What kind of light source did you use, and at what distance from the lens? Did you think about different light sources, or more generally, what role does the light source play?
Yeah, the light source is so important. When we put this test together, like I decided on purpose to go with a point light source, right? You can also do like softer light sources, light off frame. It always reacts differently. So in our case, it's a daylight balanced LED, 5600 Kelvin. It's a point light source. There's gonna be in a week or two, we're gonna add more specific behind the scenes showing how that test is shot and what goes into it. But basically it's a point source. The distance, the focus distance, I think that's important. Some people test and focus on infinity for flares or put the light as far back as possible. So I went always, what I would do for my own project, I test for what I would use most of the time, where you photograph a face, right, or a person. So the focus is set to 4 feet distance, assuming this is like an average distance where you have your talent from the camera, and then the light source is 3 times that distance. So it's another, so it's like 12 feet distance. And then it's all relevant. If you would use a massive Fresnel, you would have to go very far away. So we did a lot of testing to find the right light source and the right size, but it's like a daylight balanced LED. And we will add some more examples, like right if you would switch to tungsten or daylight or even single color, some flares, like some lenses react vastly different. Like I did a workshop at Camera Marsh last week, and it was quite interesting for people to see, like when we used multicolored LED lights and how you can manipulate not just the color of the flare, but also how strong a lens flares depending on what wavelength you hit it with. But for that Cine Flares, we chose a daylight source, so it's as universal as possible, like the sun, so to say, or even modern car headlights would be like this, or flashlights. And I think the daylight is a good universal color temperature. That's why we chose that.
Brilliant, brilliant. So heads up to everyone watching. We have around 10 minutes to go live here. So if you want to ask any more questions live about Cine Flares or just anything general from Markus, then this is your last chance. Get those questions in. And I will come back to my nerdy questions. And my nerdy question about vintage lenses, because you like vintage lenses, is what makes them special to you?
To me? I think I come back to what I said earlier about the happy accidents, like modern lenses which are designed in a computer. They are very predictable, I think. So vintage lenses, because they were designed on pen and paper, right, like, and hand polished, and not just this, the fact vintage lenses, it's like a time travel capsule, right? Like they today also don't look and react how and perform how they did maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago when they were made. Like there's so many amazing lenses, like either like old Panavision B series or C series, and I know these might have also changed over the course of time, but if you have a rehoused lens, some stuff might have changed, but a true vintage lens, which you might be able to find on eBay or somewhere in a used camera shop, the fact that the glass really aged, right, like being in some subtle layer of dust or early fungus or oil on the blades mush around. I think there's so much interesting life happening in that lens, and you just have to play with it and see if you respond to it. Maybe it's too crazy, you don't like it, and you use something more modern. But to me, that's the magic about vintage lenses, that there's an unpredictability and a human touch, so to say, because they were not designed by a computer.
Love it. So let's flip it on the opposite side, because you are someone who uses latest technology as well, very happily, I guess. Red Notice, that would be a great example, right? Using a lot of very modern technology to, well, you can talk about it more, but just, what's your opinion on, the latest technology, especially AI and filmmaking, and how that all mixes in with vintage lenses and film cameras and filmmaking in general?
Yeah, interesting field. I see friends of mine sending me images who are very involved in AI image generation, and now you can feed some of those tools. You can feed reference images, especially like something that's shot on a vintage lens, try to emulate that certain character bokeh, and it's amazing how close it gets, even without really understanding that there was a lens used in the first place. It just learns by looking at the image, and it sees a character and tries to replicate it. I think it's an exciting time. I don't know how to use it, maybe besides prep. I'm not too inspired by it. Like sometimes I see something that looks a bit catchy at first, but then it's still, whenever there's a human face, it still feels lifeless in a way, or uncanny. So I like human faces captured by real glass with a real camera by real storytellers. But it's an exciting time maybe to use in some way. I don't know yet how, but I'm very also hesitant with emulating stuff. I like the captured one. Like that's something with our database. We have such a huge database on vintage lenses, and we could train an AI how to replicate those lens flares for visual effects as a plugin, and that's something we were approached about. But it's also kind of a moral question: do you want to do that? Because it could really learn, like at edge of frame, at wide open, this weird artifacts happen. That's what all these visual effects tools can't get right. They create a sterile flare moving through the image, right? But I still like saying there's a beauty on shooting stuff for real. But I like also combining technologies. Like on Red Notice, we used video walls, like people want to call it virtual production, but it's literally, it's nothing like, it's like a blue screen, a live blue screen, or a more fancy photo backdrop, or like Red Kubrick did with front projection, now became more usable because the screens have so much more contrast and brightness. So and combining these modern tools with like vintage lenses, which offer like add that layer of human touch, will help you disguise the digital edge, so to say, or also combining. That's what I'm a big fan of, combining very high resolution sensors with soft lenses, so to say, right? Like people always ask, like, oh, why would you shoot on an 8K sensor and then use that crappy lens, right? Like, or isn't it the same? You shoot on a 2K or 4K sensor with a sharp lens, but there's something happening of fine, detailed image capture, really portraying also the subtle nuances of that lens, and then that all being downsampled and projected later in hopefully in a big screen. So that's what I think is quite fascinating.
Well, yes, that's probably the question the answer I was trying to get out of you is your input into the image that becomes even more and more perfect and more digital with the time. I personally feel that vintage lenses allow you, or film cameras allow you to sort of put your stamp on it before it goes into digital, post-production and all like that. So I'm perfectly happy with your answer. I myself don't know how I feel about AI. Obviously, we'll have to sort of accept it, I guess, and work with it. But I think it's nice that we have those real nice vintage lenses with those unpredictable characteristics and stuff like that. It just makes it fun, right? When it's too perfect, it's not exactly fun. You can't really experiment. So
yeah, that's actually about AI. Like AI, image-based learning. It brings to the table is what it learned from watching thousands, millions of images, right? And that's what I'm so fascinated of staring just at lens flares on that Cine Flares thing, because you can really discover things you haven't seen before like that. Like, how does that light, like, I think it's the purest, I don't want to become philosophical, but the purest form of photography is by purely shining light into a lens. There's no face, there's no subject, no landscape. You're purely capturing how does this lens react to light, and there's sometimes real magic happening, and that's sometimes quite addictive. So we definitely were working on a phone version, so you can play more with it while being in
I would love
somewhere.
that. I
You
would
want to
love
maybe pick
to
your
have it
vintage
on a phone.
lens while you're on the way to the rental house on your phone. So
Oh,
that's
yes.
unfortunately that beta does not work properly on phones, so you need to use a laptop or an iPad or something. But we're working on a phone version that's more fun to use.
Well, coming back to the Cine Flares, I think this is probably, you can talk maybe more broadly about difference between K35s and FDs, but we can just sort of touch on the flares. I don't know if you have them both in your platform.
Sure.
Do you want to even try to load it maybe? And we
Maybe
can.
let's take a look. So there's a development version which has a bit of more stuff. Do you have my screen?
Yes, your screen is live.
Let's take a look at spherical. Wait, I have the FD rehoused FDX version, and we want to compare them against K35s. Let's see. That's the same rehousing by TLS here. That's why the images look the same. So we can compare an 18 to 18 and take a look. So that's a bit special about the FDX. Like, I think the 18 is not in the original FD set. So you see some subtleties. Maybe let's be super fair and go to a different focal length, like a 35. And you see already the T-stop is different. The FD only opens up to T2.1, the K35 to 1.4, but let's be fair, we go stop down to T2 to see how much they resemble each other. And there's quite a difference, right? You see the FD creates warm-up flares and the K35 cooler flares, bigger flares.
Yeah.
Definitely not
So
the same ones, but not too different either.
what I like about your tool is that you can just look at this stuff rather than get someone's opinion. Because I become more and more reluctant to give opinion to people, and I'm much more interested in presenting information to people and them deciding. And it's very difficult to do when you don't have sort of maximum scientifically based information to present, because vintage lenses are so eclectic and, like you said, fungus, haze, scratches, and things like that, they can affect the lens so much that one lens can differ from the other, and the way you test the lens and everything else just so difficult to give a right opinion. So providing a tool like that and allowing people to inspect and see things, that's the way, I think, and that's why I like it. Clint is actually asking us to do the 55. Do you have the 55 on your platform?
I think so. So the 55 K30 FD. Oh wait, there is actually, good that you bring that up, Clint. There's something I have to double check here. FDX K35. There is, and this is good that we bring that up. There's an issue. That's why it's not loading. The K30, there's a bug here. The K35 is a 55 and it was labeled here. That's still a beta. That's why it's not loading and not playing, because the 55 and I labeled it as a 50, but the clips behind it are 55. So unfortunately, I cannot show you. That's a bummer.
Well, that's okay. That's something to look forward to then, Clint.
Yeah. But next time. Here, we can check out the Voigtland and Zoomar and compare it.
Let's do that. Let's do it with something else.
It's very unique golden flares, and they go very well together, I think, with K35. So we can compare. Not K35s, Kawa Cineprominars. So like you mentioned, the Voigtland has a very odd zoom range, so 36. So we compare it to a 32, and maybe we could do a T4. That's what they can both reach, because the Zoomar does only open to a T3.1. And here you see they both create those golden flares. Obviously different geometry in the flare, but
damn close.
Quite close, right?
Quite close. Clint is asking, do you have 24 or 85 K35 versus FD?
No, currently not. Like we have more, we captured more. Currently we only have, like most of the time we have only 18, 35, 50 equivalents. Sometimes more if there's more unique happening. We will add over time more other focal lengths, but initially I thought to keep it easy to compare same field of view, especially when you mix anamorphic and spherical, people get confused, right? If you compare 18, 30, Super 35, you would choose a 35 anamorphic to get the same field of view. So that's why there was initial thought to not add the full lens set, and also becomes quite a beast to shoot everything at every T-stop. But there's more, and we'll add more in the future. But it's super interesting to hear that you're interested to see that.
Yeah, that's feedback. That's feedback right there. So possibly the last question from you guys, unless something else really interesting comes in. That's Sean from Facebook. Sean, you need to allow StreamYard to see your name right there. Otherwise, I can't show you properly. But the question is, what's the T-stop that you usually use? That's a good one.
Not wide open. I know a lot of people like to shoot wide open. It depends how many actors are in the it really, basically, on testing, you narrow down what stop does the lens perform in a way you like, right? If you stop down too much, you lose too much character. If you go too wide open, lots of character, but you cannot hold more than one person in focus. So sometimes, usually between T2.8 to 8.5. Rarely I go wide open for specific effects, but rarely I stop down more than a T4.
Love it. Love it. I'm very much the same in my choices. Not that my opinion matters.
lens manufacturer could save all the engravings on the deeper teep stops. Why even put them there? Everybody ever, maybe if you shoot a visual effects plate in a desert, you want a T11 or something.
Yeah, actually, that's a funny thing. Who does ever shoot at 11 or 16 or even 22? With photography, show, landscape, whatnot. But with cinema, that would be very, very extremely rare thing to see. But we see a lot of people getting obsessed with wide open and with the speed. So that's why I'm quite happy to hear what you said, because we sometimes have these discussions on Facebook, and just sometimes people go like, oh, but this lens is 2.8, it's too slow, stuff like that. And then someone else said, well, in proper cinema, a lot of time you see 4, even 5, 6, and it looks great.
Yeah.
Don't get too obsessed with the G-stop. So that's why I like what you said.
Absolutely. And I think I'd rather have manufacturers build the lenses smaller, lighter than too fast. Like right, there's a point. Do you really need T1.4 or T1 lenses? Sometimes yes, for a fact, and it's good that they exist, but most of the time you probably don't want to shoot that wide open.
Yeah, because it's really difficult to keep in focus as well, and it's a thin focus. It's probably a lot of blooming and softness and so on. There are not that many lenses that can be that open and that sharp and perform well. It will be what we spoke about earlier. If I was doing this at 1.4 right now, good luck getting anything in focus.
Not all actors are as well trained as we are, right? And
as we are, yes. And stop down to 8. Today, I actually shoot this one usually wide open, because I just want to sort of get that background out of focus a bit more. Because the 28, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna leave it open. But then I noticed that I was soft a lot of time, and I realized that when I'm back like that, relaxed, mostly soft face, and then where's the focus? And today I was like, what's the most important thing? Is it that the background is super shallow, or that I'm hopefully sharp when I'm doing this? So I just clicked it one stop down, and I'm much happy today. Yeah,
I was trying to explain to my focus puller, when the ears are in focus, we're in trouble.
Exactly.
Like we want to keep.
Yes. So, just one more question then. It's an interesting one I came up with few streams ago, and I just ask everyone now, because I think it's a cool question. If you could only use one lens for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Probably anamorphic, but then also I would have to schlep it around. I would say 40 millimeter anamorphic. Do I have to be very specific? Which?
Yes.
Or
that's why it's a difficult question, because you have to use just one.
I think, or I change. I want to be light and nimble, but character. I would do a Cook Speed Pancro 32.
Nice, good choice.
It has a good character, a good look.
Yeah, good character, good look, good focal length. You can shoot everything with that. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up the live stream. Thanks everyone who joined us today. I hope it was useful to you. And Markus, I hope you enjoyed that as well. Thanks for joining me today. And yeah, to everyone else, we'll see you again on internet. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.